Welcome to Creamer Media's Polity. I'm Amy Witherden. With me in the studio I have Ebrahim Fakir of the Electoral Institute of Southern Africa to talk about the recent spate of strikes and protest action around South Africa. President Jacob Zuma has been in office for nearly 3 months, and in that time South Africa has seen a great number of labour strikes and service delivery protests. These protests indicate dissatisfaction only months after the African National Congress was voted in with 65.9% of the vote. Today we discuss how such protests are to be understood in the context of South Africa's democracy. Ebrahim, there seems to be a contradiction between the service delivery protests happening in the townships and the municipal service strikes taking place in cities. How can government meet its service delivery obligations in the context of such disruptive action?
Well, I think it does come across as quite a contradiction and a curiosity that you have a large number of people who've turned out to vote, a large majority of them, 65.9%, as you say, vote into office a particular political party, and once that government is in office, obviously seem to be taking to the streets. But this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, because there are distinct continuities with what's gone on over the last decade. That means we've had these kind of community protests for close on to 10 years. But I think there's a more important underlying factor also with respect to the historical continuities, in that for many people, what has occurred particularly over the past 2 months, and particularly what's happened over the last decade with what happened in the 80s, in which the impulse of ungovernability, of strikes, of protest action in the streets against an illegitimate apartheid government shows distinct continuities with what happened from about 1998 onwards. Of course, the difference is that in the 80s and the early 90s, this was about expressing citizen agency in a democracy in which you did not, or a society in which you did not enjoy the benefits of citizenship and of democracy. And of course, from 1998, it's a different story. But there is something common, I think, which underlies all of this. And this is that there is a keen understanding amongst citizens, even post the transition, that democracy is not only about the structural process and procedural aspects, that is voting, institutions of government, institutions of democracy such as parliament, but citizens, I think, do realize that democracy is also about a set of rights that they have, and fundamental political rights to express themselves in a way in which they deem fit, particularly in instances in which there are high degrees of frustration at the slow pace and the lack of service delivery in certain areas. But I think underlying it also is this driver of dissatisfaction with the way in which democracy, particularly at the local level, works. And here it's a frustration at the lack of responsiveness of what they perceived to be government inadequacies, that is locally elected representatives who aren't permeated into the communities they purport to represent. So they're not responsive and they're deemed to be unaccountable, even though there are many participatory forums at local government level, for instance ward committees, the integrated development planning process. But the barriers to entry to many of these participatory fora are extremely high. For one, you would have to understand the process and the procedural requirements for participating in them. Secondly, you would require, particularly given the kind of issues they focus on, some kind of technical knowledge about participating in them. So really, this isn't just about people saying we want to participate more. It is the actual notion of participation which is being problematized. And so I think what citizens, particularly in terms of the community protests, seem to be suggesting is that yes, there is this frustration with the slow lack of service delivery, but secondly, there is also deep levels of frustration with the way in which local democracy, responsiveness and accountability works. And that, of course, is the fault of local councillors, who seem not to be facilitating the kind of dialogue, the kind of penetration, the communication with the citizens, with the constituencies that they represent. So there's a dual problem. Of course, some of these protests are also driven, and we shouldn't be blind to this fact, with local power brokers who either are at risk of being disciplined within their political parties, have come to know or learn that they may not in fact be candidates in the next upcoming local government elections, won't either be a ward candidate or on the PR list, because our local government system takes a 50-50 approach in the electoral system. There are those who may be up on disciplinary charges in the political parties, so they kind of whoop up emotions. So in many of these instances of what we're calling service delivery protests, they aren't necessarily only simply about service delivery. They are about a range of other things. So one is going to have to be very careful to try and understand the dynamics which are driving local political behavior. The second contradiction, and this is something we should also be keenly aware of, is that you rightly point out this contradiction in which large numbers of people participated in a local government election and a national election just not very long ago, and yet they're protesting against this very government. So people are asking this question: why would a citizenry which has in large numbers voted for a particular political party go out and protest against them, and particularly in such violent ways? Well, I think the answers are becoming clearer, and that answers both relate to the democracy dimensions as well as the government dimensions. But let's also first say that voter behavior is distinct and different from general political behavior, and there are different dimensions and elements which drive both. In terms of voter behavior, large numbers of people still view the ANC in its liberation legacy. It is, for them, the only political party which actually represents what their aspirations are. The ANC also is organizationally quite adept at not just being a modern political party, but also a broad social movement, particularly through its alliance with COSATU and the Communist Party. So there are those elements which drive voter behavior. But when it comes to general political behavior, of course there are these cultural dimensions to throw back to our history, but also the keen awareness that democracy is not only about the process elements. The biggest contradiction here, however, is that we've seen now the Zuma administration much more responsive, going into the areas in which many of these protests have happened, to try and understand what's going on. So it seems to be more responsive, it seems to be more accountable, and that of course is an encouraging sign, but that does not necessarily mean that it's going to address the procedural, systemic and institutional requirements, what others would call the state capacity dimensions at the local government level, to actually put in place the mechanisms to deliver on the kind of problems you find out through a responsiveness process. So that contradiction, of course, is still going to have to be sorted out. And this government has only been or this administration has only been in government for 3 months. In that 3 months, they've decided, of course, to change certain things at the national government level, which require the inception of new processes, new procedures, new administrative regimes, and so the organizational logic in some areas of government is going to have to change, particularly in the areas which focus on the areas in which these community protests have occurred. And that used to be the Department for Provincial and Local Government. It's now at the Department for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. So they're going to have to determine very quickly the kind of routines, logics, administrative procedures and organizational issues which are going to be required to address problems that they pick up through this responsiveness or investigative process that they will undergo. So there is this keen tension between the political responsiveness of government on the one hand, and then the state capacity, ability to respond to the problems which are identified. With respect to the strikes, there's obviously a different dimension which animates them. It is the normal course of industrial relations in which an employer is going to bargain with an employee. And some people call this the strike season, others have called it the winter of discontent. If you put together all of the strikes, the community protests, it does seem as if it's a winter of discontent. But what's driving the strikes, obviously, as I say, it's the normal industrial relations, bargaining and powwow between employer-employee. But I think there is something common which drives both the way in which strikers have gone out and the way in which communities have come out to protest. And that is at the level of inequality which is still being experienced in the society. And here we're not simply talking about levels of income inequality, that is the differential between what one person at a higher level of salary earns as opposed to another, but it is also about the lived experience of social inequality, that is the bargaining power that you can use to bargain for a range of goods and services which accrue to you as a citizen. And so it is this frustration of the inability to express your agency as a citizen. And I think that's the one common underlying thread of both the two different issues which seem to have animated our society over the past few months. Of course, there's also the fact that I think by coming out to strike, the workers who were striking, let's also bear in mind, were largely public sector workers, even though there were strikes in the private sector, for example, at Massmart and so forth. But the public sector workers are all affiliated to SAMU, which in turn is affiliated to COSATU. And I think this is about this tension, about policy hegemony within the African National Congress. If we assumed that the policy debate within the ANC was settled once Jacob Zuma was catapulted to power in Polokwane, I'm not sure that that policy tension and policy debate and policy hegemony within the alliance is settled. This contestation is going to go on, and I think part of the strikes reflect the bargaining power that the unions are trying to signal to the mainstream in the ANC about delivering on the policy space is assumed would have been delivered when Jacob Zuma was catapulted to power.